Okay, now we are recording. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to have with us a dear friend and colleague, Tara Steimer, who has kindly accepted to participate in this series of events dedicated to the Levant. And just a few words to introduce Tara to the community, to the participants. There is quite a good number of people that have already joined the meeting online. Tara received her PhD in 2001, and her, so to say, most important research achievement have been a series of papers dedicated to the megalithic communities in the Middle East, related to the Chalcolithic Early Bronze Age, so 4th, 3rd millennium BCE. The topic of the research topic has been developed on her dissertation, which was submitted in 2000 and which was dedicated to the megalithic architecture in the Levant and Arabia. She has participated in the excavations and survey with the French archaeological missions directed by Frank Bremer in Syria and Yemen for 20 years, where she had the opportunity to develop her own research approach in megalithic cemeteries in Syria, Jordan, and in Yemen. She had a postdoctoral fellowship in Damascus from 2004 to 2008 that enabled her to organize fieldwork with a special focus on settlements close to or associated with megalithic tombs. Based on this work, she was able to create a typology of domestic structures linked to homogeneous groups of people. In 2005, in particular, she broadened the scope of her research after excavating an open sanctuary in the Hadramaut in Yemen, where she found an anthropomorphic statue in situ and statue menhirs in nearby areas. And these discoveries permitted to actually widen the field, the knowledge of the cultural practices of Arabian societies in the 4th millennium BC. Since 2010, she has further enlarged her research field, focusing on megaliths in Indonesia. This recent megalithism is of particular interest for the great diversity of shapes, and follows also, is a consequence also of the immense variety of human groups in the archipelago. She's I would say probably the reference person to study megalithism in the Levant, and the topic of her paper actually is of the utmost importance because actually it's one of the key topics that I think, but Tara will tell us much more, that connects actually funerary traditions and settlements in a core area of the Levant. So I thank again Tara very much for her availability, and I leave the online floor to her. And so thank you, Tara. Thank you very much. And
hello, and thank you for the introduction. So before I begin, I would like to thank Marco Iamoni for his invitation to present a lecture in the framework of the ARWA series. Having been in his place last year with my colleague Sebastiano Soldi, I know that it is not easy in terms of organization. It is also a lot of work, so thank you so much. As Marco said, for more than 30 years, I have been interested in the megalithism in the Near East, and almost all its forms, funerary, commemorative, but also domestic. So the presentation that I have prepared today for ARWA is a kind of continuation of observations and interrogations that I have accumulated throughout my prospecting, excavations, and research on megalithism in the Levant. The title, When Megalithism of the Settlement Passes to the Tomb, a global study of megalithism in Southern and Central Levant, may seem a bit enigmatic, but sums up quite well the state of my thinking today. Okay. Before I begin, I need to recontextualize the topic and how I approached it. To do this, I must look back on 20 years on collaboration with Frank Bremer and Christophe Nicole in southern Syria and northern Jordan. The study of the settlements is a field with which they are familiar, and they have given me the benefit of their field experience and their hypothesis. My first excavation as a student in Syria was in Khirbet al-Umbashi in 1992, under the direction of Frank Bremer. There was also Christophe Nicole who was digging with him. Both were very interested in the settlement structures that were numerous and varied in this area. I later discovered that Hara, like Leja, but also the Golan, all are basaltic areas, get an incredible archaeological potential. The most remarkable was we have sites from all periods that are juxtaposed, and because there is no much sedimentation, it is very easy to survey and obtain plans of villages, hamlet, and necropolis. I spent these first 2 months in the desert with a Syrian team led by Ahmed Taragji from the DGA, who was excavating the funerary structures that were located at the margin of the Bronze Age villages. It seems obvious to me that this necropolis of 1,500 megalithic tombs was the funerary space dedicated to the inhabitants of the other bank. Unfortunately, things were not that simple. According to the observation of Frank Bremer and Christophe Nicole, the settlement sites was not linked to the tomb. So to understand the reasoning, it is necessary to describe the state of research in the 90s in the Southern Levant. Frank Bremer's work followed on from that in Jordan and the Golan. While the proximity of the most extensive dolmen field of Jebel Mutawak in Jordan to the largest early Bronze Age 1A settlement site has long been recognized by Nelson Glueck and James Hembury Tennyson, the implications of this relationship are debated. Hembury Tennyson attributes the dolmens to the pastoral groups that it tentatively dated to the Bronze Age 4, following Epstein's work in the Golan. If the theories were supported by K. Prague, Stephen Helms, it's because indeed all the megalithic tombs are not found near a village. Even when researchers argued for an early Bronze 1 date in the 80s, the nomadic paradigm remained firmly entrenched in the mindset, and this was felt in academic work. The nail was driven in with the publication of Matania Zohar's book, Pastoralism in the Levant. I began and ended my PhD with the firm idea that the megalithic monuments were the graves of mobile pastoralists. 30 years later, on revisiting the documentation of Khirbet al-Umbashi and other places like the Leja, Golan, Ajlun, and Akkar, it seems to me that the link between settlement site and necropolis has been too quickly eliminated. I propose to return to this delicate question of the relationship between settlement sites and tombs. We will start with the Hara. The study area is located 80 kilometers southeast of Damascus and 55 kilometers east of Suwaida. These are ancient basaltic flows which, in just 25 kilometers, lead to a series of depressions with an average altitude of 500 meters and which borders the southwestern part of the Safa volcanic massif. In the Khirbet al-Umbashi sector, ancient basalt are the surface, as in the wall of the Hara, an almost uniform paving of basalt blocks and pebbles with a long axis of between 5 and 30 centimeters, distributed in a rather homogeneous way, like in the picture. The team, led jointly by Ahmed Taragji, Frank Bremer, and Jean-Claude Eschalier, carried out several excavation and prospecting campaigns at Khirbet al-Umbashi in its region from 91 to 95. The Khirbet al-Umbashi region, like other areas of the Near East regions, have been under heavy human pressure for the millennia, which has led to a degradation of the natural vegetation. The biomass is very low due to the harsh climate. Grazing can, however, be practiced during the winter and spring. Considering the number of the kites, mass hunting was also a subsistence way of resources. Here is a map of the Khirbet al-Umbashi site. It is located 3 kilometers from the large depression of the Safa Massif on either side of the lower course of the Umbashi Wadi, which flows against the north edge of the volcanic. The archaeological complex of Khirbet al-Umbashi, in terms of the duration of occupation, comprises 5 major building complexes of different periods and 2 necropolis spread over an era. It consists of 60 to 80 hectares devoted to building alone. It was occupied from the end of the 4th millennium BC to the middle of the 2nd millennium, with episode of abandonment. The location chosen by the first occupant had a number of potential advantages. Overlooks the wadi in its close natural reservoir. Here. The first set of buildings noted is a rampart. The complex was built at the very end of the 4th millennium BC. A C14 date was obtained on charcoal from a soil associated. I would like to draw your attention to this element because it is not insignificant. It is the oldest trace of architecture on the site. The eastern wall of the 4th millennium BC, the rampart, has all the characteristics of megalithic and monumental architecture. Following the definition of Luc Laporte, megalithism is a human behavior spread all over the world. So my question now is what the manipulation of large stones as a complement to wood or as a replacement for it could have brought to pre- and proto-historic communities in the Hara. Is it this action of moving, pulling, implementing which requires the participation of a large number of people? We are convinced that the rampart is a collective architectural project. In the background, there is a ritual aspect in the recurrent annual collective effort, like a ritornello that leads one of the or more groups of individuals to come together for a common goal. The stone, small or large, is a vector of communication between the living, the social link for something that makes a strong impression. So the stone architecture becomes part of a landscape where it transmits an intergenerational message such as mnemonic, knowledge, identity, belonging to a group, status. In my opinion, we have to consider the monument as a whole that is important, and it is the intention behind the choice of individuals. Here we are in the excess, since with a structure of approximately 1,000 linear meters covering an area of approximately 4 hectares. The picture of the wall is significant. You can observe 3 levels of foundations with large basalt blocks. And this is only the preserved part. In the rampart, there is a doorway with a lintel. The cross-sectional drawing on the slide shows the beginning of a corbelled vault. From an architectural point of view, the rampart is a perfect example of the skills of the Umbashis builders in the early Bronze Age 1 and 2 at the turn of the 4th and the 3rd millennium BC. Within the rampart is a structure of roughly rectangular plan measuring 20 by 12 meters called by the authors of the excavation the megalithic house. It is situated high up in the center of an earlier curvilinear settlement excavated by Dunant in 1933 and associated with a platform. The megalithic house rests on an artificial hill and is associated with large empty building space of 250 to 300 square meters to the west. The roof of the house was a basalt slab. There are remains of 2-meter long cross bays. They probably use a system of simple corbels. This megalithic house with a rampart are the oldest on the site. They are both collective buildings contemporary with a clustered habitat of small rooms. All these places have been used as a storage area. The fauna discovered tell us about the presence of beef, goat, and sheep. Animal exploitation is attested by the presence of butterballs. The ceramic and flint tools show parallels with the Southern Levant. The novelty for Umbashi site is a choice for the inhabitants to use a rectangular plan for their monuments. This novelty is repeated in the southwestern quarter of Umbashi. It's in yellow on the slide. The rectangular house plan of the Chalcolithic period, 500 years earlier, is well known in the Golan, but they are narrower and chain-like. Those with axial colonnades or hypostyled halls are known from the early Bronze Age too in Southern Levant and Byblos, but often associated with public and religious use. It seems at Umbashi there are domestic units. The distribution of the megalithic houses is in the southwestern sector of the site, north and east of the Wadi Umbashi. It appears that at Umbashi, the first megalithic architecture is in a domestic context. The case of Khirbet ad-Dabab is particularly interesting as it is an early Bronze Age II site, little later than the megalithic houses and the rampart in Umbashi. Located 7 kilometers from Khirbet al-Umbashi, it is a group of hierarchical settlement of 135 to 150 covered rooms. What is it? Absolutely new is that this village of Khirbet Dabab, which dates from the early Bronze II, is built around 2 elements, a megalithic tomb and a well. This tomb is unique. There is no other one around. As you can see from the black and white photograph on the slide, the roof of this tomb is made of large slab. The chamber is very elongated and oval and surrounded by a rectangular mound. This grave has been interpreted as a receptacle of a common ancestor around which people come to build their house. The proximity of the well is also important. It is a central area where all the occupants of the village converge every day. In the case of Khirbet Dabab, the grave becomes the focal point of a community. It must have been the object of a collective work as for the well. The techniques for extracting the slabs and assembling the walls are the same as those for domestic structures. We note that this tomb is protected by an enclosure. A door is marked by an upright stone. You can see on the picture. From an architectural point of view, the early Bronze Age II is also the time of the appearance of the corbelled vault at Khirbet Dabab, but also generally in the leja area. The ceramics found provide information on the eating habits of the inhabitants of Khirbet Dabab, since they use open dishes and jugs for the consumption of liquids. Let us return to the site of Khirbet al-Umbashi. Frank Bremer, Jean-Claude Chalier, and Ahmed Taragji in their 2004 publication describe an area 3 kilometers long and 800 meters wide along the wadi on the right bank, covered by megalithic tombs. This area is divided in two parts, separated by an empty space and some settlement structures. In total, there are 1,340 tombs. The authors of the excavation find it difficult to situate these graves chronologically because none of them touch a house, except for one grave located in an enclosure in the southwestern sector. Apart from this grave, which predates the enclosure, it is possible to make a relative chronology. It is impossible to make a relative chronology. With such a large number of graves, the necropolis must have been used for a very long time, but only 10 graves were excavated, 8 of which were in the eastern necropolis and 2 in the western necropolis. All the chambers are integrated into a quadrangular or oval tumulus, with or without a doorway, and vary in size from 2.25 square meters to 76 square meters. In the necropolis, one can distinguish tombs that are larger and with a more sophisticated architecture. This is the case of 11 monuments. The plan of the 4 tombs that I am showing you on the slide is characteristic of the layout of the monuments. The tombs are next to each other, sometimes with up to 20 tombs. Agglomeration of tombs mark a link between the deceased, allowing the construction to be seen in several stages. Sometimes the graves are connected by a section of wall, we call that a funerary chain. The placement of the chamber was done by natural or deliberate digging, but it is impossible to say whether this was done to place the chamber or whether it was a quarry for the cover slabs. The chamber is covering by monolith slabs and sometimes, but very rarely, by joint slabs. The architectural process is as follows. First, they dug off the pit in the basalt and often the adjacent silt, like in the Akkar in the Menjas tomb. Construction of the chamber walls is a second episode. Then they are putting the bodies and they are filling with the silt. They are laying with a thick slab from the basalt surface and they built the enclosure. Between the enclosure, they fill with the same fine earth, and they are finishing with a layer of small stones on top. Enclosure wall was not really necessary, nor anything above the slab. I interpreted as a protection against looting. This complicates the reuse of the chambers. Door facing east or south is the commune opening. And we have also corridor with few steps when there is a slope. About the human remains, the tomb number 12 was for a woman. The tomb number 13 was for 5 skeletons. They were associated with 2 bronze knives and a basalt pendant. 2 children were deposited first, then 3 adults. It was a simultaneous burial. The material found has been dated to the early Bronze IV. And the C14 date on the slide comes from the top of the cover slab on the upper part of the stone layer of the tumulus. In the tomb number 14, we found an adult and a child, and in the very small tomb number 15, some fragment of bones from a child. These tombs could be individual or collectives. Now the question of the relation with the settlement. Unfortunately, Frank Bremer could not tell from the excavation and survey data whether these graves could be linked to permanent settlements or to the camps. With this megalithic tomb necropolis, we are faced with a dilemma. First, it must be admitted that few tombs have been excavated compared to the total number. Of the 10 graves, 8 are from the same area, are in the eastern sector. 2 graves yielded material dating to the early Bronze IV and the C14 date from the ritual deposit on the surface of the tumulus. With these small evidences, the authors conclude that the megalithic tombs necropolis is dated from the Bronze Age IV, so from the end of the 3rd millennium. But at this period, at Umbashi, the Bronze Age IV settlement site corresponds to round, elliptical houses with irregular shapes. Christophe Nicole even describes a tomb destroyed by these housing blocks. If we look at the architecture of the tombs with vertical walls, quadrangular mounds, large slabs, stairs and doors, everything tends to link them to the housing structures located in the southwest sector. They are rectangular houses with fairly similar devices and identical slab acquisition techniques. These houses are probably contemporary with the rampart of Early Bronze I and Early Bronze II. With a sample of Khirbet Daba built around a megalithic tomb, the architecture similarities, the megalithic tombs in Umbashi, appeared at the same times at the beginning of the 3rd millennium during the Early Bronze Age too. With 1,350 tombs, we surely have a long occupation of the site, and we can exclude a final use during the Early Bronze Age IV. To conclude on the Hara, megalithism appears with a collective work, like the rampart or large megalithic houses, and is quickly transformed toward individual or family funerary architectures. Within the framework of the Franco-Syrian project of the Archaeological Atlas of the pre- and protohistoric sites of southern Syria, a prospection has been carried out since 2003 to 2010 in the Leja area, where several long-term occupation settlements have been discovered. Situated at the frontier between the steppes dedicated to pastoralism and agricultural lands, the Leja is a basalt plateau regrouping several megalithic sites from the early Bronze Age. This concentration of stone architecture can be explained by a geological characteristic of the fringe of Leja. The depth of the basaltic sublayers bring the water table close to the surface. Resurgence ponds then provide access to abundant water for much of the year. This abundance of water, the proximity of arable land in the plain and the grazing areas of the Leja hills are converging elements that give this area of Leja a strong potential. All the constructions are in basalt. As for the Hara, there is no sedimentation and a low reoccupation of the same site. The intensive survey shows the exceptional case of the Leja area. 450 square kilometers were surveyed. We found 522 sites and they were described. The density is 1.16 site by square meters. Most of them are situated in the periphery of the basaltic plateau, in the fringe of the cultivated plain areas. We found 84 early Bronze Age sites and 126 from the Middle Bronze Age. Between 2004 and 2007, I did an exhaustive description of the types of tombs and their distribution. So we found 18 necropolises and 8 of them were with megalithic tombs. So in the slide, I have notified the most important. Some of the necropolis are located in the vicinity of early Bronze Age settlements, including 11 sites with double houses like in Sharaya, Karasam, Tune, Hib, and Kirata. There are also isolated necropolises and settlements sites without necropolises. I will present two sites in details, one in the northern area, Sharaya, and one in the southern part, Karasa. Both have different specificities. Sharaya is a site situated at the northern limit of the basaltic zone of Leja and the southern limit of the Great Plain that extends to from Damascus. In the schematic map, you can see that the Sharaya area revealed discontinuous occupations from the Chalcolithic to the Middle Bronze Age. The main occupation identified and indicated by colored areas on the slide are from the Chalcolithic in blue. Early Bronze Age 1A in green, Bronze Age 4 and Middle Bronze period in brown, and the dolmen field to be dated to the early bronze, probably from early bronze 1 to early bronze 2. The remains of these different occupations are partly obscured by the buildings of a modern village in the northern part of the map. In the south, the superposition of some of these occupations can be explained by the reuse of stones from earlier occupations, particularly for the tombs in the necropolis of the southern part of the maps, as I will show you in the following slides. Sharaya is well known for its huge village from early Bronze Age 1A with double halves houses. The village is shown in green on the schematic occupation map of Sharaya. As you can see, we have an occupation in the southern part. You can see it in the red circle, which is outside the walled area. These double half houses are obviously been abandoned by their occupants in favor of the area behind the wall. In the picture, you can see that the houses with double halves are particularly well preserved in plan, but also in elevation. The model of the blocks used for the walls is very homogeneous. The occasional presence of corbels indicates that the builders were familiar with this covering technique, although they did not use it systematically for the covering of the houses. Still in the southwestern area of Sharaya, there is a necropolis of megalithic tombs. This necropolis comprises about 150 dolmens, 83 of which are concentrated on a 450 meters long basalt spit with an average width of 300 meters oriented northeast-southwest. Some of the tombs are built in the ruins of the Chalcolithic dwellings, as in the picture down. You can see the dolmen's chamber here, attached to the inside wall of the chain house. In the early Bronze Age, 1A houses, and this is the case in the picture where the dolmen is outside of the house. Here, you have the wall of the double half house. The dolmen is outside, but it is using the remain of the destroyed part of the house. The rest of the funerary monuments are scattered in the depressions between basalt mounds further south. The question of contemporaneity with the early Bronze Age village arises. Indeed, some dolmens encroach on the double half houses that are located outside the ramparts. No dolmens were built on the ruin of double half houses within the early Bronze Age 1A village enclosure and inside the enclosure and the rampart. From an architectural point of view, dolmen builders use a uniform stone format for the walls of the tumulus. They reserve the large slabs for the orthostat and the covering of the chamber. The burial chambers have various shapes, rectangular, quadrangular, and circular and oval, and are frequently covered by a tumulus. Semicircular tumuli with a rectangular chamber are strongly represented with more than 70% of the monument. At Sharia, the interweaving of the tombs and the settlements provides a unique opportunity to determine a terminus antiquae. The tombs were built after the abandonment of the Chalcolithic village and the southern part of the early Bronze Age A1A scattered houses. In the absence of excavation, our hypothesis of contemporaneity with the early Bronze Age 1A village is based primarily on the topographical situation in marge of the main village and the rather similar architectural elements between the dolmens and the double houses. It seems the northward shift of the domestic space during the early Bronze Age 1A period inside the walled area prompt the inhabitants to move the burial space closer to home by moving it from the bottom of the valleys to the top of the basalt mounds. In the picture, you can observe the arrangement of the blocks, especially the shape of the tumulus and the halves of the house with a predominance of rounded walls. Next site is Kerasa. It is situated in the northern part of the Leja and occupied from the Natufian period to the Middle Bronze Age. There is a tale occupied in several episodes. The first one, marked by a major collective architecture project, is the first half of the third millennium BC, with the construction of a rampart wall covering an area of 5.6 hectares. Its elevation was 5 to 6 meters. In this period, nothing remains or nothing existed in the center of the tell. Therefore, we could have a rampart and a large empty central space, like in Rirbet al-Lumbashi at the same period. As for Sharia, we found one double house at the northern bottom of the tell. It is the only remains of an early Bronze Age 1A village that must have disappeared with the extensive cultivation of the land. The necropolis of Kerasa, with its 232 graves covered 14 hectares in the northern part of the tell, and the double house, it is the largest one in the Leja area. The burial chambers are surrounded, like in Sharia, by one or more walls, forming usually a semicircular tumulus, and more rarely oval or square. Originally, these walls rose above the chamber. Monuments are 1 to 2 meters high. A stone field protected the graves of looting. The burial chambers were covered by large monolithic slabs. We also have samples of dolmens with oval chamber and a corbelled vault, like in the slide. These dolmens have an access door. The pottery and bead material in the one excavated represent a period covering early Bronze Age too. This is exactly the same architecture that I have presented for the unique tomb in the settlement site of Hirbet Dabab and the oval tombs spread in the necropolis of Rirbet al-Lumbashi. Here is a map of the distribution of the archaeological remains in Kerasa. The prehistoric inhabitants of Kerasa took advantage of the solidified basalt flows, which could be easily dismantled into small blocks of large slabs to build a variety of structures, rampart, double house, enclosure to protect their resources like the garden, olive trees, walls, landscaped paths, and dolmen for their deceased. It is difficult to chronologically align the dolmens with the remains found. We know that the rampart of the Tels is from the early Bronze one, that there was a village of double houses from the early Bronze Age 1A. Then the dolmen with an oval chamber are from the early Bronze Age 2. It is important to point out that in the entire burial area of the map, which also includes gardens, built paths, and walls, there are no overlapping remains. The only possible observation of interaction is a poor state of preservation of the semicircular tumulus of the dolmens compared to those with oval chamber. It is very likely that their cover has been reused. This could give them anteriority. Besides the architectural knowledge necessary to manipulate slabs or rock weighting several tons, the adoption of plans for their monuments combined with innovations demonstrate that the inhabitants aim to structure both domestic and funerary spaces, the latter being surprisingly not exclusively devoted to the dead. This society presents all the characteristics of a hierarchical organization, like in the Hara, with the presence of bigger tombs in the necropolis, tombs linked by wall, with patrons able to mobilize a large group of builders, as is evident from the wells they produced and the monumental structures they built. As for Herbert and Lubumbashi, megalithism appear in Karasa with the building of a collective monument, like rampart, then move quickly to individual or family tombs. It seems at the end of the period, still like in Lubumbashi, there is the regroupment of tombs. Here you have a perfect example on the slide. In Lubumbashi, they are built against each other, whereas in Karasa, they are grouped together in a large burial enclosures or in plots bounded by walls. In order to illustrate a little more broadly the complex relationship between the settlement sites and the megalithic tombs, and especially which of the two was a precursor in terms of megalithism, I will quickly go over 3 areas where I had the opportunity to work in the Syrian Golan, the Ajlun in Jordan, and currently the Akkar in Lebanon. In 2007, I did a survey in the Golan with the collaboration of Ayham Zouobi from the DGA. We made the same observation of the presence of settlements near the tombs. 2 types of settlements were described, one in a chain and the other one with double apse. The chain dwelling, like that of Sharaya, is also frequent in the Golan at the site of Ras Marbosh, close to the famous megalithic tomb of Rouge Mal Iri, recently dated from the Chalcolithic period, about 10 kilometers west of Ain Dakar. Here again, there is no overlapping in Ain Dakar. There is no overlapping of monuments. The dolmens are close to the settlement site, or the settlement sites are close to the tombs. Ethnographic samples show it's not inconvenient for the living to share their space with the dead. In Ain Dakar, the question arises to what type of house, if any, can the dolmens be attributed? In 2006, I had the opportunity to conduct a survey in cooperation with Lamia El-Khouri from the University of Irbid in the western part of the modern city of Irbid. We counted more than 185 dolmens and about 20 rectangular or double houses. Here too, we can only deplore the absence of excavation and the numerous destruction due to urban developments. A distribution map shows that these remains are very frequently located in the same areas, and they have many similarities in the construction and block acquisition techniques. Since 2017, I have been working in Lebanon in Akkar, and since January 2022, Zuzanna Wignanska and I have been supervising a joint project called MEGA. In the framework of this project, we have been able to identify the presence of dolmens and settlement structures, rectangular and double half shape. We are investigating the relationships between these monuments, and the first observation based on relative chronology shows that the settlement sites appeared first. We expect the C14 date to be confirmed in the coming months. In conclusion, we can say that in the recent years, surveyed conduct in the Levant have increasingly identified structures related to settlements sites located to the dolmens field. A review of the work carried out over the last 30 years shows that the relationships between the settlements and the necropolis has not always been considered. Not enough excavation have been carried out to be able to be affirmative. But if we stick to the study of architectural techniques, we see that the communities of the Levant quickly acquired the essential knowledge for the construction of collective buildings, rampart, megalithic houses. Very quickly, these techniques were put to use in the service of the cult of the ancestors, but also in everything that could shape the landscape. For example, the walls of terraces, plots of land, constructed passes, enclosures. At the end of the Chalcolithic and the beginning of the Bronze Age, there was a real appropriation of the territory. This affirmation must have given rise to a great deal of competition between communities. Through the observation of the architectural techniques and the landscape distribution, we can propose some connection. The relationship between the megalithic tomb of Rouge Aliri in the Golan and the Chalcolithic chain houses is a current issue, still an interrogation for the Akkar dolmens field. In contrast, we could be more affirmative with the Hara, the Leja, and the ajlun. The early Bronze Age 1A double half houses are associated with dolmens whose shape in a rectangular chamber and a semicircular tumulus. The early Bronze Age 1 rectangular houses are associated with dolmens whose shape is a rectangular chamber and a quadrangular tumulus. And finally, the early Bronze 2 rectangular houses are associated with dolmens whose shape is an oval chamber and a rectangular tumulus. Now it remains to be seen what degree of sedentarization this community had. If we consider the excessive effort to build for the living and for the dead, it is hard to believe that these communities left these spaces unoccupied for a long period during the year, as proposed by some researchers. With a project like MEGA, we hope to answer to this recurring question of the subsistence mode of the dolmens builder. I look forward to seeing you in 2025 with perhaps some answer. And I thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, I am at your disposal.
Wow, thank you very much, Tara, for this absolutely fascinating and great overview of megalithism in I would say almost the entire Levant. So I'm very happy actually that you accepted to participate, because you gave actually the perspective also on a topic that is absolutely, how could I say, complementary to studies of complex societies and in the Levant. I mean, it's for me, I mean, it's something that I touched briefly, but it's always nice to see the results of this research in this topic. So I think we might have questions from the participants. If anyone has any doubts or anything that wants to clarify. Yes, we have Manar Hamad. Hello.
Sorry, Marco, do you continue to
oh yes, you're right.
Register?
You're right.
Yeah. Thank
In
you.
any case, I would have cut it if I forget. It happened a couple of times and I forgot cut. I'm stopping the recording. Yes, you're right.
Thank you.